Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaidamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashaadhyayinim Amba Tvam Anusandadami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu Te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipa Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapane Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gītāmrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogda Gopalanandanaha Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gītāmritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Om Namah Shivaya. And after for 3 weeks, maybe, since I think the last class was middle of November. So we went to California and Michigan, and Amma came to give us even more inspiration than just the scriptures. And now we're back to the Kurukshetra battlefield, where we are getting very close to the end of chapter 2. And it is the longest chapter in the entire Gita. So we have today's class and maybe one more class next week. I think I'm here on Friday, yes. And then we will be moving on to the chapter 3. So this last section of the Bhagavad Gita started with 3 verses regarding the characteristics of a realized being, or what Krishna calls here, Krishna and Arjuna both call here astira prajna or sthita prajna, one of steady wisdom. Then we are now in the middle of 11 verses regarding the sadhana or the spiritual practices required to become such a being. Right? This is the difference, or one of the important characteristics about India's tradition, the Vedantic tradition, Advaitic tradition, the Yogic tradition, is that they not only talk about this lofty state, but they say you can also become that. You don't just think of it as something far away that you're never going to actually experience. This is what we're born to experience. So we're in the middle of those 11 verses where Krishna is explaining how to become such a realized being. And after those, we're going to finish those 11 verses today, and then there will be 4 more verses on characteristics of the realized being at the end of the chapter. So, without further ado, because we have a few other topics to talk about at the end, if we finish beforehand. So, we will proceed into verse 65. prasade sarva dukkhanam hanir asyopajayate prasanna chetaso hyashu buddhi paryavatishtate. You guys just choose somebody, some lucky person. Okay.
In grace is born an end to all his sorrows. Indeed, the intellect of a man of exalted consciousness soon becomes firmly established.
Okay. So that word grace actually is a tough translation. It comes from that word prasadaha in Sanskrit, which actually we all know. We think of it in terms of something sweet like payasam that we're going to eat. But here they've translated it as grace in the ashram translation. I've heard various translations, balance, equanimity, peace. But here I think grace or peace is a really good way of thinking of it, because at the end of a puja, when you get the prasad, you're supposed to be taking that, partaking of that, and feeling peaceful or feeling grace, the grace of God. So it's not, prasad doesn't mean like something to eat. Right? It means that feeling that you're supposed to have when you receive that consecrated item that was on the altar or was used in the puja. So in this verse, Lord Krishna is talking about two benefits that we get from that feeling inside of prasadaha. Because we have to refer to the previous verse 64. Why are we talking about prasada? We have to back up, because he had said in the last class, one of controlled senses who is free from attachment and aversion, raga dvesha, that person attains happiness of mind, which is the translation of prasadam here, even while enjoying various objects through his senses. In other words, he transcends the attachment to those objects, and he lives in the world, but he feels happiness of mind even amidst that. So the translation in 64 was happiness of mind, and in this 65 it's translated as grace. Okay, anyhow, what is the benefit of that prasada that he's getting? Krishna explains twofold benefit here in verse 65. First of all, he says it's going to end all sorrows. Now, who wouldn't be interested in that? You know, they advertise things on the TV and in the magazines and everything, and they say you can have this, you can have that, but nobody can claim, no product can claim, say, this washing machine will end all your sorrows, or this car, or this anything, this vacation to Hawaii will end all your sorrows, because there's a lot of people who are miserable at all of these tourist spots. So the only thing that can actually end our sorrows is an inner condition, because sorrow is not an external condition. So he says that it will end all the sorrows. It means it will bring happiness or joy. That's the only way to end sorrow, is by bringing about joy or happiness inside of a person. So we have to remember that it's not saying that we're going to go out and buy happiness. I forget what it said in the airplane yesterday. We were flying from Rome, and it said, what was it? it was an advertisement for Coke. It was on the screen like every 2 minutes, and you couldn't make it go away. It was just, well, it said like open happiness or something like that, huh? And it was like as though you're opening the lid, and then out comes happiness. You know, it's like it's there in the bottle. Yes, yes. It's not actually all these saints and Buddha, everybody, they were all wrong for thousands of years. Actually, it was Coca-Cola. You know, if we had only known, we wouldn't have to waste all our time with all these things. So no, you don't have to pour it from a bottle. You know, it's inside, as we know from what Amma teaches us. So Amma gives a beautiful example about how we get confused by the objects of the world, thinking that they're giving us happiness. Anybody remember the example she gives? We think that we're getting it from the objects, but actually it's coming from within us. Yeah, Devidas, which one?
Chocolate. You eat one piece, it might make you happy, but you eat.
Right. That's one example. There's another example that's much more really applicable here, huh?
Dog chewing on a
There it is. That's the example. That she says, dog chews on a bone, and then someone else, other than Balin, can remember what the principle was, the tattva? The blood comes from the bone, and he drinks, he tastes, because of the bone breaks and it cuts his gum, the blood comes from his gum, and then he tastes the blood, it's his own blood, and he thinks, wow, this bone tastes great. You know? So this is, Amma says, this is basically what we're doing with all these objects of the world. You might think, well, I'm not cutting my gums when I'm drinking Coca-Cola or something like that. But effectively, all it's doing is giving a sense of pleasure that's actually coming from inside of you. And with all the pleasures in the world, there's actually a side effect of weakening our minds that comes from it. So in a way, it is harmful if we do it too much, right? So according to, the dog seems crazy for thinking that he's getting blood from the bone when he's drinking his own blood. But Amma says that basically we're no different from the dog. So we shouldn't make fun of the dog, actually. We should really be thinking more deeply about why Amma makes that comparison. And what she says is that we have a feeling of discontent before we enjoy the objects of the world, whatever they may be. This means everything, basically. Food, possessions, people, doing our bidding or doing nice things for us, and every possession that we have in our life. And position, praise, all these things. These are all basically objects of the world that give us pleasure. We think give us pleasure. So we start off discontent about something. We think it's something from the world, but as we saw earlier in the class, we drew it on the board. Basically, that feeling of discontentment comes from the feeling of incompleteness in us, which comes from the ignorance, right, of our true self. We went through this whole process of explaining that. So however that discontentment comes, it's there. Everybody runs around in their lives trying to satisfy it. So that we start off from there, and then we have a big piece of cake, or whatever it is. Think of your favorite thing in life, whatever that is, say food, like a cappuccino or, chapati, yeah. For someone from North India, beautifully prepared chapati, right? So whatever it is, or South Indians would be like the world's most crispy dosha, It's like, so what happens when you put that thing in your mouth, whatever your favorite food is the discontentment still there in your mind when you're eating that thing? Actually, it's not. It isn't, is it? Why? Does that mean that it really satisfied it? Maybe it did satisfy the discontent. What happened? Temporary distraction, or it removed, it was something that our vasanas make us like so much that we get completely absorbed in the experience of that object. So it temporarily dissolves everything else, right? It's sort of like a counter-stimulant, It stimulates the mind in a different way, and your mind becomes completely immersed in that temporarily. Like Jayshree said, but after you finish the dosha or the cake or whatever, Does the discontentment go away forever? No, not at all. So but because this is how the process works, we fool ourselves into thinking that somehow that momentary disappearance of discontent is equal to obtaining contentment from the object, right? There's a difference between momentary dissolution of discontent and acquiring contentment, right? Does that make sense? They're two different things completely. So, but we somehow get those two confused, and we think that we're getting happiness from these things. So this is exactly what he's trying to say here. End of all the sorrows is because we feel real happiness, real peace inside, so that depending on the objects for happiness reduces, or later on he says it goes away completely. It's sort of like that example people give about hitting their head against the wall, and it feels so good when you stop, right? You're hitting your head against the wall, doing something, like your job or whatever, and when you finally stop hitting your head against the wall, you think, wow, this gives me so much pleasure. It's not a question of getting pleasure, it's a question of stopping suffering. That's all it is.
But Swamiji, it's conditioned according to this sloka on grace.
But that translation of grace is actually a little bit of a wrong translation. It's not the grace that we talk about when we think of Amma. It's not what it is actually. It's a different, the English is a little sketchy, I would say, for that word.
How would you translate it?
Peace of mind.
Just
Peace of mind. Because in the previous verse he says it's translated as happiness, and then it becomes grace here. So it's a little sketchy. I'm not quite sure how it got translated that way. Anyhow, if you look at the English, I'll find other English translations of this verse, but I've never seen actually grace for that word. There must be a rationale for it. So, joy is the first benefit of having that peace of mind. Because once the mind becomes peaceful, nothing else has to be done. The bliss of the self starts to well up from deep within us. Like if you sit down next to Amma, we feel so much joy just being in her presence, because she makes our mind still. She's got such a powerful spiritual vibration emanating from us, it makes our mind still. Sometimes if I can't figure out how to express something, like I have to give a talk like tomorrow or something, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've got this some kind of idea and I don't know how to express it. So I just go sit down next to Amma, and invariably everything becomes clear, because the mind becomes calm, and then the thought process becomes clear. So similarly, when we get a feeling of mental peace within us, the joy comes up naturally. And the second benefit that comes from prasadaha, or peace, is that the intellect soon becomes firmly established. That's the other thing he says in this verse. So why does that happen? Why do we have to become peaceful for the intellect? Or basically it means our understanding of these spiritual truths. Why do we need peace for that understanding or intellect to become firmly established? He connects the two, so there must be a reason.
Because knowledge only flourishes in a passive, quiet, no mind state.
You know, that's one aspect for sure. A lot of people say that when they hear and they had this wonderful experience with Amma, like she just came to Michigan, I think most people went there, and then how long you are able to maintain that vibration depends in large part on how chaotic not your life, but your mind is. The life can be chaotic, but if it doesn't affect your mind, you can still maintain that feeling that you get from being with Amma for a long time. But if the chaos of your life makes your mind chaotic, what you got from Amma doesn't last very long. Does that make sense? Right? So that's what it is. It's the ability to preserve that state or that feeling we get from Amma depends on how peaceful we're able to keep our mind. So similarly, whatever knowledge, whatever understanding we've gained from Amma's talks or just meditating in her presence, that will be firm if our mind remains peaceful. If it doesn't, it can easily just dissipate very quickly. And we certainly won't be able to meditate deeply on Amma's teachings if our mind is not peaceful. The whole point of her giving us these teachings is for us to reflect on them in our lives and implement them, to practice them, right? She's not just, saying all these things for her own, just to hear herself talk. In the old days, I don't think Amma used to give this many teachings. She would just, she had a few disciples, she would make them do a lot of sadhana. But because most people, like us, are not able to do that much sadhana, she has to repeat the teachings over and over and over again. But then the assumption is that we're all reflecting on them in some way in our lives. That's the only way that we can really absorb it. But to reflect on them, we need to have some stability in our mind. Another example, a comparison that's been given is that it's not the quantity of food that one eats that matters, but the amount of nutrition that you're able to assimilate from the food. I know there's a school of thought, I'm not very expert in it, but there's some people who are very knowledgeable in combining different foods so that you can really absorb all the nutrition from what you're eating. And there's some people who can explain, like, if you combine this with this, you're not going to absorb all the nutrition in the food, and it's, you think you have to eat more, but it's partly because you're not assimilating all the nutrition that's in the food. So like that, it's not the quantity of books that we read and all these things. We have to assimilate and absorb the teachings that we're coming into contact with. So for that, our mind needs to be peaceful. That's why he says the intellect soon becomes firmly established. So what's the difference between wisdom and firm wisdom? Or intellect and firmly established intellect? It's basically the same thing. That's what he's getting at. Why do we want firm wisdom? Why not just have wisdom? Or firm knowledge? Why not just have knowledge? And what's the difference when you have a firm conviction in the wisdom? What difference in your life? There should be a practical difference in our life, right? That's what Amma's getting at. Okay, and what is someone else tell me, what is the benefit of having unshakable wisdom? If there's no benefit, we're not going to do these things, right? We're all what do we call that? Utilitarian, yeah.
I guess the way that I would view it is, I think you get glimpses of the wisdom, then you take that and you have to practice that until it becomes firmer. So it's kind of the playground that we have to work these things out and practice them.
Okay. So being able to choose the right thing in life. Okay, someone else had their hand up over here.
I think I was going to say the same thing. It's if you have firm wisdom, it's easier to discriminate between what's good and what's bad.
Right. Now, another thing, everybody's right, and I just want to add one thing. That firm wisdom, I think we will all find as our understanding of Amma's teachings deepens. I'm not saying me, I'm saying all of us, right? We will have the inner strength to actually practice it. Because sometimes it's not a question of understanding it intellectually, or just being able to discriminate between what's right and wrong. You have to have the inner strength to be able to do the one that your heart is telling you is right. See what I mean? It's a different thing. The mind has to want to do that also. That's the problem, because I think it was Ravana who said, right? I know what's right and I know what's wrong. Or maybe it was Duryodhana. I think it was Ravana though. I know what's right, I know what's wrong, but my mind won't let me choose what's right. Mind won't let me choose dharma. My mind is programmed to do adharma. So think about that. That's that's actually where a lot of us are like Ravana in a way. It's like, I know that this food is junk food and it's not good for me, but I eat it anyhow, or whatever it might be.
It's habit, force of habit, vasana.
It's not just force of habit, it's mental weakness. Because you may catch it, but whether we can stop it or not, right? You can catch the habit. I know I have the habit, but how do I stop it? When the wisdom becomes firm, then, and probably none of us has that firm wisdom, that's what I'm getting at, just very sort of indirectly. Then we can finally practice it. All these things that Amma teaches us that we've struggled to practice will become easier once that wisdom becomes established. And once the understanding becomes established, in order for that understanding to become established, our mind has to be relatively peaceful. It's like pouring concrete and then shaking it up every 5 minutes. It's never going to set and become firm, right? So that's why Amma has certain guidelines, do's and don'ts for life. If you read her books, one thing that struck me when I started editing the translations of Amma's teachings, there's a lot of should and must and have to and need to, these lots of do's and don'ts, in other words. And for the Western mind, it's a little heavy on do's and don'ts and shoulds and should nots. But this is the reason why, basically. She's giving us guidelines. This is how you make your understanding firm, because you can't expose yourself to too many things that will disturb your mind. If you want that concrete to set, you pour it and then just let it be peaceful for some time. Let it be still for some time. So the real utility of all these teachings comes when we make it firm. So that's the point. So practicing what we talked about earlier, Shama and Dhamma. What were Shama and Dhamma? What were those? What was Shama? Yes, what? Someone over here said. Huh? Regulating your thoughts. Yeah, focusing the mind, but especially regulating it, your thoughts, being able to control them. And then what was Dhamma? Right, including the body, right? So the body and the sense organs. Okay. So this is a continuation of the previous verse where he says the mind needs to be relatively free from likes and dislikes. And those likes and dislikes, the reason why we focus on those is because the likes and dislikes of the raga dvesha are what create all the sorrow for us in life. Think about it. Let's say some information comes to you. The information alone is really neither good nor bad, right? Information is just information. But if you combine that information with an attachment that you have inside, or an aversion you have to something inside, then that information becomes either joy-producing or sorrow-producing, right? Like, let's say, you look at the weather forecast and it says tomorrow there's going to be rain. That information is just neutral, right? But if you were going to go golfing, it's really bad information for you because you are attached to the idea of going golfing, right? But if you're a farmer and you need rain for your crops, you'll be jumping for joy. Same information, right? It's a question of what you're attached to or what you have an aversion to. So the attachment plus the information creates the sorrow. So in the next verse, Krishna again emphasizes the importance of prasada.
What is the meaning of exalted consciousness?
Exalted. That's prasanna chetasa. It means someone of an elevated mind. He's talking about, it could be reference to realized being, but this what does he say? Exalted consciousness doesn't necessarily mean 100% realized, but for the sake of the discussion, the context, we can assume that it's somebody who's realized, because he's talking about a realized being the whole time. So he says, the man of exalted consciousness. We can assume probably it's a realized being. Sometimes the words themselves don't convey a really clear definition, but from the context you can assume that it, or we can look at the Shankaracharya Bhasha and see. He might even say that it means the realized being. Okay, verse 66. Nasti buddhir ayuktasya na chayuktasya bhavana na cha bhavayatha shantir ashantasya kutha sukham. We can have our friends from Brazil visiting here right there. Have them read.
He who is not established has no intellect, nor has he any steady thought. The man without steady thought has no peace. For one without peace, how can there be happiness?
Okay. So he says, one who is not established, ayuktasya. Yuktasya, yuktaha means actually one who has control of his mind. Usually it means one who, it's translated many different ways. I think he uses established here. It's also translated sometimes as an integrated person. It's also translated sometimes as the one who is self-controlled. So it's a little bit of a vague term. But he's basically referring to somebody who practices, because it's a continuation of the previous section where he talks about the importance of Shama and Dhamma. So he's talking about the importance of maintaining these practices in our life. And even at every stage of our spiritual progress, because Amma herself emphasizes the importance of sense control and mind regulation, Shama and Dhamma. Some people think that regulation of the senses or Dhamma is only for beginners, and they think, oh, it's all one, what doesn't matter, But Amma recommends it actually for people at every stage of the path. Maybe somewhere along the way, people may be able to relax that practice a little bit, but Amma has told a story about how even until the moment before God realization, there's a danger of us falling on the path. So it's better to be careful. The body may cooperate, but then the mind also has to cooperate. That's why the practice of Shama always goes along with the practice of Dhamma. So let's say you all use your bodily or sensory restraint and you pull yourselves to Gita class on Friday night, right? So the body's here, the sense organs are here, but the mind can go anywhere during the class. Can go home and do the laundry and cook dinner and come back, like we said last time, right? And if it's Ramayana class or Mahabharata class, it's not such a problem because it's a long story, and anyhow they're in the forest for years and years and years. When your mind comes back, they're still in the forest, so you didn't really miss a whole lot, right? But the problem is with the Gita, everything is a logical progression, and he's got this whole argument that he's laying out to convince Arjuna. And we're missing, parts of it, right? So we can easily miss the whole point of what Krishna is trying to say. So we need, for Vedantic scriptures, we need to have Shama and Dhamma, even while we sit and study them. Even if you're not sitting for class, even if you're sitting at home doing it, you know, maybe in the morning you may be fresh and everything, but still your mind has to cooperate. So, the scriptures also recommend certain spiritual qualities that we need to have to be a student of these teachings. It's a beautiful verse that I want to share with you. It's not from the Gita, but I'll share it anyhow. It runs, Kaka drishti bakad dhyanam shwana nidra alpaharam jirna vastram etad vidyarthi lakshana, which means Kaka drishti. Kaka means, in Sanskrit, anybody know what kaka means? Crow, yeah. Yeah, and drishti means the sight of a crow, right? So, in America, we don't really have that so much awareness of crows. If you go to India, you ever seen a crow looking at something? What is the quality that we can learn from the way a crow looks at something? Huh?
Sideways, isn't it?
Well, all birds look sideways. Their vision is sideways. Concentration, that focus. You could say it's ekagrata. You can also say it's shraddha. They are so focused when they're looking at something. And just imagine if we could always be focused on God like that, always focused on the teachings like that. So there's something we can learn from a crow also, right?
The Native Americans, they do the same way.
Ah,
They
great.
refer to the crow as the one that has the sight that doesn't miss the point.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, you could say eagle eye too, but anyhow, for the sake of this, I think sometimes they want us to try and think of mean or sort of very, lowly beings as potential gurus for us, because we tend to discriminate in that way.
Like the story of Kakashun.
Yeah, exactly. So then Bhakat Dhyanam, Bhakat Dhyanam means Dhyanam means meditation. What is Baka in Sanskrit? Anybody know? Crane. Baka in Japanese means fool. So I tell the Japanese people about Bhakat Dhyanam and they're like, that's me. I fool's meditation. But Baka in Japanese means crane. So when you look at a crane, what can we learn from a crane? What kind of quality can we learn from a crane? Stillness. What else? Graceful. Yeah, they stand on one leg for a long time. They don't move. Silent. Can you imagine meditating on one leg for like half an hour? I can't think of anybody who could do that. They're so graceful. We can't even sit, in a comfortable position for that long, maybe. So we can learn a lot even from a crane. What about Shwana Nidra? Shwana means dog, and Nidra, most people from India know that means sleep. So why we say in America we say sleep like a dog, something like that. But what is the quality of a dog's sleep that we should actually be learning?
Always alert.
Huh?
Alert even in sleep.
Yes, it's very shallow sleep. Maybe not like an old dog, like if the dog is like 19 years old, probably it's not going to get up much at all anyhow. But most dogs, they hear a small noise and they jump up, and they look around and start barking. Oh, no, the barking part we can drop, but we should have that alertness even in sleep. I know this, I always remember Ramakrishna Swami sleeps very shallow, like little things happen, he suddenly jumps out of bed. I sleep in the same room with him, so I have to be very quiet so I don't wake him up. But he when he first came to the United States, the first few years, he used to intentionally push himself so that he wouldn't become lazy, because they were coming from doing years of really strict sadhana in India, and then when they came to the US, he was really worried he was going to become lazy. So during the US tour, he used to lean against a chair and sleep. so that he wouldn't become lazy. So, can try practicing that one and see maybe that's good for not becoming a lazy sleeper. And then alpaharam means minimal food. This one we can all understand. When we eat lots of food, we become lethargic and tamasic, and we don't get up to do things. Even if there's something that needs to be done, we'll be like, oh, I'll do it later. So overeating is always bad for spirituality. And jirna vastram means what? Those of you who know Indian languages. Jirna, yeah, we can say simple dress, right? Simple dress. You don't have to wear worn out, tattered clothes. This literally is probably more for monks, brahmacharis, in an ashram. And don't show off your new robes or anything like that. But for people living in the world, it means you wear simple clothes. So these are all the qualities that we can imbibe, which will help us to also absorb more from the teachings. So Krishna is telling Arjuna to develop his shama and dhamma, without which spiritual progress won't be possible. So here, buddhi, the word buddhi, how does it get translated here? Buddhi, intellect. So the understanding that I have from the commentaries is that it refers to wisdom. Because buddhi translated directly does mean intellect. But each context it's used in a different way. So we can understand this as wisdom. So one who has both mental control, mental discipline, and physical discipline, or discipline of the sensory organs, acquires wisdom. But one who does not have that control in his life, he has no peace. Steady thought is translated, yuktasya is translated as steady thought in the second part of the verse. So for one who doesn't have steady thought or doesn't have mental control, there's no peace for him. And if there's no peace, how can there be any happiness? So he's establishing a very logical argument here. So if we cannot control our body, sense organs, and our mind, there's no question of acquiring wisdom. So it's sort of like a kind of a way to threaten us into doing these things, basically. If you want to be happy, you have to have wisdom. And if you want to have wisdom, you have to observe these do's and don'ts of spirituality. And imagine, even if contemplation, simple basic contemplation requires these two, how much more mental and physical control are required for us to do deep meditation on Amma's teachings. Just simple contemplation in our daily lives requires it. So deep meditation certainly requires it. One commentator has said that to try to do deep meditation, or what Krishna calls nididhyasana, without regulating our body, senses, and mind, is like trying to repair a road without a barricade. That's why they put the barricades on the roads, because can you imagine if you're trying to repair it and the cars are driving all over at the same time? It'd be impossible. So it's a little inconvenient, yes. You have the barricade, and then people, curse the construction work that goes on the highways in Chicagoland in the summer and outside of winter time, because it makes life miserable. But it's the only way to fix the road, and we need the road. So shama and dhamma and these observances, it may be silence, it may be fasting, it may be some kind of stillness practice. All these things may feel a little inconvenient, but they're necessary. For beginners, not for Amma, right? Not for Mahatmas. And even if we want to meditate on Amma's form, we still need to practice these mental regulation, physical regulation, because if we're constantly thinking about all these other things, we'll never be able to even visualize Amma's form. Because there'll always be cravings that come up in our mind, right? When we're trying to meditate and something pops up in our mind, it's not a random occurrence. It's there, it pops up because we have an attachment to that, because we have a craving to do these things. So anything that pops up in our mind when we're trying to meditate is basically a sign of where our attachment lies. You don't think of things that you're totally disinterested in, right? Like, for me, my meditations never get disturbed about thoughts of the fluctuation of the stock market. It's one thing I can say, because I don't have any stocks, don't have any plan to have any stocks, don't have any attachment to the stock market. So I can safely say it never disturbs my meditation. But there are other things that can disturb my meditation easily, right? So that's because those are the things I'm attached to. So use it. It's not negative. You can think of it, okay, this is something I have an attachment to. Good. Make a note of that, a mental note, if not a physical one. I have to work on my attachment to such and so. And unfortunately, whatever those attachments are for, those objects, people, and things cannot even give us the happiness that we're seeking. They're incapable of giving us the happiness we're seeking, but our mind goes to them. Anyhow, there was a survey done recently, I forgot where, but the conclusion of the survey, of the research project, was very revealing. It said that up to annual salary of $75,000, there is a direct impact of your income on the level of happiness that people report in their lives. This is America. After $75,000 per year, the survey showed that there was no direct correlation between people's happiness and their income after $75,000 per year. So maybe in America today you need about that much money to just have a comfortable life, meet your basic needs, and without worrying about whether you're going to be able to pay your car payments and all that, and be stressed out. But after that, even if you have 100, 200 million, 200 million, there's no direct correlation according to the survey. It's an interesting point to think of. So, we may be able to get peace of mind through other methods, temporary, right? We may get a thrill from buying something or from getting recognition from people or praise from people, but it's never going to be permanent peace of mind. As Jayshree pointed out, all these experiences are very short-lived. Even when we go on vacations, what do people say when they go to a vacation somewhere? Where do people from Illinois go on vacations, by the way, besides the ashram? In summertime, they go to Wisconsin, right? And wintertime, you go to Florida. Where do you go? Huh?
Canada.
Yeah. Where do they go in wintertime, for example? Huh? Amritapuri, yeah. Amritapuri is not a fair example because actually that does help your spirituality. So, Florida, let's say you go to Florida. So someone who comes back from Florida, what would they say typically after their vacation? Huh? No, what would they say about the experience that they had? The sea smelled so nice. Or like how they feel. Or something about how they feel, what would they say? Weather was nice. It was. It was so peaceful. It was so beautiful. It was so nice. I was so happy. It's all past tense, right? They don't come back and say, I am so happy because I went there. I am so peaceful because I went there. I am so contented. It's all past tense. So it just shows, just the way we express our experience of things shows that it was temporary. So don't need any other proof. In the Katha Upanishad or Katha Upanishad, it says that only knowledge of the self gives permanent peace. It's a nice concept. It's a nice thing to remember. Only knowledge of the self gives, or knowledge of Amma, you could say, knowledge of Krishna, knowledge of Buddha, gives permanent peace. Happiness is impossible without peace, he says, because happiness is a reflection of the self, right? That bliss of the self is reflected in our mind, and we experience it as happiness. This is what Amma says also. She gave a beautiful satsang about it a few years back. The happiness we experience in our daily lives is a brief reflection of the bliss of the self. Now, in order to reflect something, what do you need? Exactly. If you were trying to look at yourself in the mirror and someone was shaking the mirror like this, wouldn't that be a bit annoying? In the old days, they didn't have mirrors. What would they do to look at their face? They would look where? Water. But where would they look? In the rapids or in the stillness of a pond? They would look in a still pond. So the water has to be still in order for you to see the reflection. Like that, the mind, in order to reflect the bliss of or Atmananda, has to be still. That's why he says there's no happiness for one who does not have peace. Shankaracharya gives a beautiful definition of pleasure. He says, when we become free from the craving for the enjoyment of the sense objects, that is pleasure. Pleasure is freedom from the craving for the enjoyment of the sense objects. Isn't that a beautiful definition? It's very different from the definition that we typically think of. So that means there's two types of happiness. One is indulging in sense objects, which, as we said, gives limited temporary happiness. Freedom from desires for the sense objects gives permanent happiness, unlimited happiness. It's a nice concept. So here he's talking mostly about the importance of shama, or mental regulation. So why is dhamma necessary if you're already doing shama? Why is control of the senses necessary if you're already trying to control your mind? He talks about that next. Indriyanam hi charatam yanmano nuvidhiyate tadasya harati prajñam vayurnavam ivambhasi.
When a man's mind is governed by any other wandering senses, his intellect is carried away by it as a ship by the wind on water.
Okay, so remember, buddhi here is translated as intellect, but it can be understanding, knowledge, wisdom. It can be interpreted in different ways. So we could say, for example, our knowledge or our understanding of Amma's teachings is carried away, like that. So anybody here has read Tao Te Ching? Tao Te Ching? It's a beautiful text. It's such a fantastic text, a Taoist text. There's a verse there that says, the 5 colors make man's eyes blind. The 5 notes, musical notes, they have 5, even though we have 7 in India. They talk about 5. The 5 notes make his ears deaf. The 5 flavors injure his palate. Goods that are hard to come by serve to hinder his progress. So, it's quite contrary to our typical understanding of the objects of the world. We think that these things are great, but at least Lao Tzu said that they were obstructions to the path. Because we don't have control, that's why. So without mental without sensory control, which is Dhamma, knowledge of the self cannot arise in the mind because it disturbs all the experiences of these objects, disturbs our peace of mind. Typically what happens when Amma gives a satsang, I'm not giving satsang, Amma's giving satsang, so we sit there on the stage and I often look in the audience and I see there's a big difference in the attention level of the people. Some people, it's a long, maybe it's about 45 minutes, maybe they find it too long. Some people are really focused, like they've been starving and they're finally getting nourishment. Some people are kind of nodding off sometimes. Some people, are focused for a little while and then they get distracted and everything. So we have to be mindful of which one we are when we're listening to Amma talk, because the inability to control our senses will create that distraction during the satsang. Because the mind will start to get carried away along with the senses. Senses in the mind are very closely connected, unfortunately for us. So whatever's going on with the senses, unless you have a lot of mental control, is going to affect the mind. And then what might happen is that after the satsang, all we remember is the jokes and the stories. Often people come up and they say, I loved that joke that Amma told. That funny joke. And then sometimes if you ask, do you remember what the point, the principle behind the joke was? And they say, what was it again? Remind me? All we remember is the joke. So we have to be careful. Amma's telling these funny things for a reason. She's trying to teach us something. You remember the one that, I won't go into that, I'm not going to test your guys' memory. Anyhow, the jokes and the stories are a side dish. These are like the pickle in Indian food that's meant to increase your appetite and add some spice to the food. It's not the main dish, right? The other food is the main dish. Can you imagine somebody serving up a big plate of pickles and say, here's your dinner? Just take a little bit of it, but the real thing you're trying to eat is the rice and the curries. So we have to remember that all the stories and the jokes are just like a little pickle to help us digest the rest of the content. We shouldn't walk away only with the pickle in our mind, right? So be careful. So those wavering sense organs make it impossible for the knowledge or understanding to take root in our mind. His intellect is carried away. It means the knowledge is carried away because the mind is carried away by the senses. So the senses carry away the mind, and the wavering mind carries away the knowledge, basically. So let's say you were to go, you were leaving your house and you had $100 in your wallet. You put $100 in your wallet when you left the house. And you went to the grocery store. You got to the grocery store and you put all the stuff in the basket and you get to the counter and you go to pay and you open your wallet and the $100 is missing. What would you deduce had taken place by the time you left the house and got to the grocery store? Well, let's say you put it in your purse and it was zipped up. You didn't just lose it. No, let's say you went straight there. Huh? No, let's say all these things you didn't, it was safely there. It was in your pocket, all that stuff was not a problem. Stolen, it was stolen. Right? Even if you put it there safely and everything, there's a possibility that it can get stolen. So in the case of this verse, it's like that. The wisdom, the understanding has been stolen away from us by the mind. The mind that is affected by the wandering senses. That's what's happening. So let's say you come to Amma's program and she gives you a very valuable teaching and you put that in your mind when you're here at the ashram, when she comes, and you go home, and you get home, and when you need to practice the teaching, it's not in your mind where you would put it before. What does that mean? It got stolen. Got stolen by the mind that was over-influenced by the senses. That's why he's saying Dhamma is so important. Amma is giving us all these teachings. You may even listen and hear the satsang. And you may say, yes, I understand what you're talking about, Amma. That makes so much sense. And you go home and you can't practice it when you get home. It doesn't come to your rescue at the important, decisive moment because our mind was carried away by the senses. So many people talk about that. It's one of the most common questions that come up when people are asking spiritual questions. At that time, my mind I forget everything. And I react, I get angry, I get depressed, whatever it is. So what Krishna is probably trying to say here is that it's not a question of intellectually understanding, it's a question of keeping the mind from getting over-influenced by these sense objects. So create a certain routine or discipline that you don't overexpose yourself. The pleasurable stimuli always demand our immediate attention, don't they? You have to do this now. Your mind will say something like that. For the things that it likes. But what about the things that we don't like? Does the mind ever say to do it right away? Clean the toilet right away. Does the mind ever say that? Does it give as much importance and priority to that as, say, the cake or, having tea in the morning or something like that? Before you drink your tea, you should clean the toilet. And the mind never says that. Drink the tea first, sit down, read your email, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do today, So this is the mind's trickery. And charanam is the word that is used here in the verse, if I'm not mistaken. Indriya, what's the word? Charatam. Yeah, charatam. Charatam means, roaming around, like a cow grazing in the field. So our mind is just kind of grazing all over the place. Our senses are grazing all over the place. And we don't have them tied up. They're just kind of going wherever they want, stepping on everything. Would you let the cows graze in the garden here, like Divyanand and everybody has spent so much time slaving away to grow the vegetables? Would you let the cow graze around in there? It would crush all the vegetables, all the hard-earned vegetables. And if we want the senses to rove around in the world and we let them do that, that's one thing. But it shouldn't be that they go on their own without our permission. That's the problem. Dhamma means if you give permission, they don't do it on their own. That's all. It's okay to have Dhamma and then allow the senses to do something. But the decision should be yours. It shouldn't be that they unilaterally go on their own. Does that make sense? Right? Dhamma doesn't mean you don't let your senses go out anywhere, ever. It means that when you let them go, it's a conscious decision, that's all. I'm going to have this piece of cake. I'm going to have this or that. Or I'm going to, do something pleasurable. Take my family out to dinner or whatever. Or go for a movie with the family. It's a conscious decision. You're not being dragged there helplessly. Yeah, exactly. The reins are in your hand, not in the hand of the sense organs. So Amma has compared it to riding a bicycle. She said that once you become an expert at Dhamma, once you become an expert at Shama, you don't need the Dhamma so much. But we're not experts yet. So when you become an expert at riding a bicycle, you don't have to be constantly focusing on holding the handlebars and pedaling and keeping your balance. You can enjoy the scenery and you can, look at things and be peaceful, maybe listen to some music and sing a song while you're riding your bike. But that's only after you become an expert at it. So we should focus on becoming an expert, basically. So the reason why the understanding or the intellect or the wisdom is so important is because that is what is supposed to be, of course, grace of the Guru. But the grace of the Guru comes to us in the form of wisdom. That's what, like Tom said, it helps us to choose the right thing in life. It's supposed to help us cross the ocean of samsara, but that most precious wisdom is getting carried away, just because of some carelessness on our part. So until we become realized that mental control is not full, so we do need to maintain a degree of the sensory regulation as well. So let's move on to the last verse for today, which is 68. Tasmad yasya mahabhaho nigrihitani sarvashah. Next part's a little long. Indriyanindriyarthebhyah tasya prajna pratishtita. I think it's missing a T actually. It says pratishita. It's supposed to be pratishtita. Yeah, it's missing a ta. Okay. No, actually, it's just missing after the sha, it needs just a T with a dot underneath it. The H is already there. Yeah, T with a dot underneath it, not an H with a dot underneath it. They got the dot in the wrong place too. Okay. It's the first edition. We have to cut them some slack. Okay, Ron, please.
Therefore, he whose senses are all withdrawn from their objects, almighty armed, his intellect is established.
Okay. So this is the end of the section on the sadhana or spiritual practices required to become a realized being. It's the last verse. It's the same idea that was expressed in verse 58, which was, when one withdraws one's senses from their objects, as a tortoise draws in its limbs from all sides, one's intellect or wisdom is established. So he starts this section on the sadhana with the same point, and he ends it with the same point, which is sense control. Remember we talked about those the forelegs and the head all get pulled inside of the tortoise's shell. So they're a symbol of Dhamma, of sensory regulation. So, do you all remember why Dhamma is not suppression? Remember we said it's not suppression. I mean, it can become suppression if we're not careful. But what Krishna is talking about is not suppression. Why? What's the difference? What's the difference between suppression and Dhamma? To be careful, because it could easily, if we're not clear, it can become, yes?
The desire comes naturally to want to hold in and
Very good point. The desire comes naturally. Why? That's the key thing. The desire, when you desire something, that means what? Yeah, it's a good vasana in this case. It's a vasana for doing good things, Dhamma. So it's a higher, Amma says, replace the negative vasanas with positive vasanas. But how do you get that positive vasana or that positive habit of sensory regulation, sensory control? Aware of that? What truth? Of what?
the vasana, that you have that. So
Of-
with the awareness, you can make the choice as to whether to continue in that pattern or to take a new pattern.
Right, and why would you try to take a new pattern? Yeah, Tom?
I mean, because of the duality of things, I mean, seems like if you would have an experience that takes you out of that place of suffering, like maybe that day you don't have that desire, you know how that feels inside, then you have the other thing where you say, well, if I choose this way, I know that I suffer.
Right.
You know, cloudy, so you have.
Okay. So you've got a conviction, right? So I think that's what you were trying to say also, basically. You guys were all trying to say. There's a kind of a conviction that comes inside of you that tells you that this is good for you. And I think that's also what Jeshu.
It's more than that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's the desire evaporates. You realize and see the benefit. The desire fades.
Yeah.
You see it no longer serves a purpose.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, I think it's also kind of semantics. You can say that that is the conviction, or you can say it's not conviction, it's that you realize that it doesn't meet your needs, it doesn't actually fulfill any, it doesn't give contentment, happiness.
It's not a conflict.
Right. So you have transcended it because you realize that there's a higher pleasure in life. You don't need this thing anymore. Yeah.
We have a friend in Brazil. He
Mm-hmm.
runs the satsang in São Paulo.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, so if you're going to the U.S. to see Mother, take your kids to Disney World before you see Mother.
Uh-huh.
Because after it doesn't make sense at all. So we just went through this.
Okay.
We had a week with Mother in a retreat, and it's like you forget about everything,
Mm-hmm.
and it's amazing how everything that you actually don't need happens. But
Mm-hmm.
when you come back to real life, yeah, you need to pay your bills and stuff, you know,
Right.
and they do happen. And the second week, I was running after work,
Uh-huh.
and nothing happened. I mean, all the bad stuff that could happen did.
Oh.
You know, so I think pretty much is we focus on the wrong things. You know, our hearts are in the wrong places. You know, and personally, the more I'm closer to, you know, to realize being like Amma, to God, you know, the more I know that I really don't know anything and that I need to be around her.
Right, okay. So we value it ourselves. I mean, we understand, we begin to understand the value ourselves. So it's not that somebody has to tell me that you should do this. You understand inside of yourself, this is important. I'm going to do it because it makes me happier. I'm happier in life. It gives me more value than the other things. So it's of your own volition. It's like, let's say, there's a beautiful example that's given in, I think it's Awakened Children, volume 5 or 7. Amma talks about somebody who's eaten junk food his whole life. Does anybody remember that example? Huh? He says, the translation that Swamiji writes, Amma says that imagine you are a person who has eaten junk food your whole life, and then one day you finally get to have a taste of wholesome cooking, like home cooking, the most wholesome meal. After you taste that, you'll finally realize that the junk food was junk, and that it was, was not really that tasty. So then you're going to want to have wholesome food after it. But if you don't know any better, you're just going to continue to eat junk food. So if you give up the junk food after tasting something wholesome, it's not suppression, right? If someone tells you, oh, junk food's bad for you, and then, oh, I want to eat it, and you stop eating it, then that's like suppression. But if it's because you know there's something higher in life and that's better and even tastier, gives more joy, it's not suppression. And another thing that is pointed out in the commentary is that, yes, suppression is dangerous, no doubt, but unrestrained expression of desires is also dangerous, right? If we just do everything the mind tells us to do, that's a very dangerous, slippery slope to get in as well. You may know somebody, in your life, in your family or friends, who got into some very dark place just because they became a slave of their vasanas or their desires. Addictions happen, debts happen, right? People take loans and then they can't pay them off because they have so many desires, they want to borrow more money. I've seen it happen in Japan so much. You know, the applications for personal bankruptcies in Japan increased almost 300% over a 6-year period in the late 90s. They had the bubble economy in the 80s, and then in the 90s, the economy was not so good, but people still had the desires and they couldn't control them, right? So they borrow money thinking that they're going to be able to pay it off, and bankruptcies mushroomed. And then at the same time, suicide rate rose 50% in Japan in a 10-year period. Suicide was the largest cause of death in 2006 amongst people aged 20 to 39. So the young age when you're really trying, you know, you've got all these desires that you can't control, especially men have a very high suicide rate in Japan. And in USA, between 2008 to 2010, which was when? Right after the recession, the suicide rate rose 4 times faster than previous years. So the desires haven't decreased, but the resources decreased, so people throw away their lives. This is the danger of, you know, unrestrained expression of our desires. So the Bhagavad Gita doesn't prescribe either repression or unrestrained, indiscriminate expression, but sort of an intelligent regulation. Intelligent regulation is what we're looking for. It's like channelizing the flow of a river in a particular direction to produce energy, making it powerful. So not dispersed, but not damming it either, right? Channelizing it. That's what we do in the spiritual path. In fact, even science says that we're not utilizing all of our mental energy. I don't know if it's true, but I read somewhere that even Einstein didn't only use a small fraction of his brain capacity. Now tell me, I don't know how smart the person was that figured that out, you know? So I mean, how smart do you have to be to know that Einstein didn't use all his brain? Means that you're saying you're smarter than Einstein? I don't know. But maybe there's some way they can tell how much of the brain was activated by doing a CT scan or something. But anyhow, whatever the case is, it seems that you know, this psychiatric field or maybe the neurological field is convinced that we're not tapping all of our mental capacity. So it's not suppression. And Amma has said it's like the police officers, the traffic police, are they suppressing traffic? What do you think? They're regulating it, you know, for the purpose of removing or avoiding obstructions, hindrances in the traffic. So just like the traffic police are not suppressing the traffic, this Shama and Dhamma, these practices are not suppression. We're regulating our energy, conserving our limited resources, and applying what energy we do have efficiently and effectively in our lives. The Viveka Chudamani has a beautiful verse 76, you can refer to it if you want, very similar to this one. Shankaracharya wrote that. He says, the deer is killed because of its slavery to, actually he says, the following 5 animals are killed because of their slavery to one of the 5 senses: deer, elephant, moth, fish, and honeybee. Okay? So the deer is a slave to sound, and the sound of the mate. So a hunter can imitate that sound, and the deer comes and they shoot the deer. An elephant is slave to no touch, actually, because they use the female elephant to rub against the male elephant, and then they catch the male elephant that way. At least we've never caught elephants, so we don't know how these things work. The moth is a slave to sight. It sees the flame and goes close to it and burns up. The fish, we know which one the fish are slave to. Taste. You throw the bait in, catch them on the hook. And the honeybee is a slave to smell. It goes after the smell of the nectar and gets caught in the Venus flytrap or gets caught in the pitcher plant or something like that. So the point that Shankaracharya says is that these animals are killed just by being slaves to one of the senses. Human beings are slave to all five. So think about their condition. It's a very sad condition to be in. So the tortoise example is better. Very naturally, when a danger comes, you pull all the senses in just for that time, and when the danger is gone, you let them come back out again. It should be natural. It's not like you're constantly, the tortoise doesn't sit inside the shell all day long. It's only when there's danger. So Amma has said a better way to look at the objects, instead of looking at them with covetousness and desirousness, like a flower, don't look at the flower and think, oh my God, I want to have that. She says, look at it with adoration and love and respect, because it's part of God's creation. It is God. Amma said that God permeates the whole creation. So the beauty of the flower is God shining through the flower. So you can adore it, you can respect it, you can love it. And also your own body as a temple of God. So when you look at your own body as a temple of God, you'll be careful of what you put in it and how you treat it as well. So if we want to start with one of the five senses or sense organs, the tongue or the mouth is the most important one, Amma says, because all the bad things come out of the mouth. All the agitating things and harmful things go in the mouth also. So be mindful of what goes in the mouth and what comes out of it. It's actually the taste. Yeah, it's an organ of sensory perception and action, both. So it's speech is a karma indriya, and the taste is jnana indriya. So mouth is one of the few which has actually both. It's both a sensory organ and an organ of action. So that's why it's doubly important. So this brings the section on sadhana to a conclusion. And now in the next section he's going to talk about the characteristics of the realized being again. He's going to give a very famous and Zen-like verse and also make references to the highest state that we can all attain. He's going to do that next week. He's not going to do it today. And we're not going to have questions because I want to mention a couple other things. If you have questions, you can stay afterwards. I know people are curious about some of the things that have been going on recently. I also want to remind you that on Tuesday, December 2nd, it was the 5,116th birthday of the Bhagavad Gita. Did you all know that? It was Gita Jayanti. Did you talk about it recently?
Yeah, it was on the internet.
Oh, okay. So Gita is considered to be the mother of all because she gives rebirth or birth to us because she ends samsara. So she's a mother who gives us a new birth, basically. And it is celebrated all over India in great form. And next year, if I'm here for Bhagavad Gita Jayanti, maybe we can do something along those lines. Basically, people recite the whole scripture from start to finish, all 700 verses. They have competitions for children to try to memorize the chapters and recite them properly. And you have a judge panel and they evaluate them and they get prizes and things like that. Maybe next year we can do something like that. And they have dramas and skits and plays of stories from the Bhagavad Gita or the Mahabharata. It's also on Ekadashi, so people fast on that day as well. So we can try to do something like that. And distributing free copies of the Bhagavad Gita on that day is said to be very auspicious as well. What happened on the Gita Jayanti this year? Amma gave a talk. So Amma gave a sandesha or a message on the 5116th anniversary of the Bhagavad Gita. It was very symbolic. And she gave it in an unprecedented context. So that Rome program was meaningful in many more ways than one. And if you look at her teaching on that day, there were some things that she said. You know, the whole text came online today. The whole text of Amma's speech is now online, and I printed it out, but you can't look at it. No, just kidding. You can look at it afterwards. But some of the things she said were so Vedantic, just like the Gita teaching. She said, this life is to be spent performing good deeds as an offering to God. Just like Karma Yoga. The law of God's court is dharma. Let us all strive to respect and follow this law. Selfless love transforms the mind from a demon that enslaves us into our own liberator. This is exactly what Krishna is going to say later on in the Gita. He says the mind should never become our enemy. You should use it as a tool for liberation. And Amma says that we need to awaken the latent courage and self-confidence and help the victims to arise. They need to realize that they are not helpless and vulnerable like kittens. They're mighty and courageous lions. We have to help them elevate their minds. This is exactly what Krishna says to Arjuna in the Gita later on. And she also says, we need to exercise restraint for everything in life. We were just talking about it. We need to exercise restraint for everything in life. And in this context, she was talking about lust, because that's the problem in all the abuse of 70% of the victims of human trafficking. It's for sexual exploitation. And she says, in the Bhagavad Gita, the Creator and creation, it says that the Creator and creation are one, just as waves in the ocean are one and the same. The consciousness within all of us is the same. May we all develop the discernment to love and respect life and those living around us. May we see others' pain as our pain and their happiness as our happiness. May we bow down in reverence to all that is good in the world and find eternal happiness. Just a small selection. There's so much.
There's another non-coincidence in the fact that today was an anniversary of freedom from slavery. And if you think about the anniversary of reading of the Gita, is to free us from bondage, which exactly...
Spiritual bondage, exactly.
Spiritual bondage is
exactly.
The Gita is teaching us.
Yes, that is. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Larger sense.
That came up, but and it's an amazing symbolic teaching. So, now that we're on the subject of Rome, I know we're out of time, but I figured you might want to hear something about what happened there. So, indulging the patience of people who have time to wait. Those who don't have to wait, don't feel embarrassed if you have to go. When we were all in Michigan, Devi Baba ended, and at least I myself, about an hour and a half after Devi Baba, I had to get ready and go to the airport for an early flight. And went to Rome. One of the local devotees picked me up and took me to the hotel where we were staying, which is where Amma was going to stay. It was right on St. Peter's Square. Has anybody ever, it was my first time going to Rome, and not to mention the Vatican and St. Peter's Square. Has anybody been there? The Basilica? The Basilica? Okay. I was completely blown away. because it was so huge. This is typical Roman style, very huge, like a colonnade and everything. But the thing is that it made 500 years ago, more than 500 years ago. No, 500 years ago. And there were this is the thing that blew me away, how they could do this 500 years ago. This is the setting that Amma was about to enter into, right? There's this St. Peter's Square, which is actually an oval. I don't know how I got the name square. It's an oval. There's 300 pillars there, okay? So 300 pillars, okay, no big deal. But these pillars are huge. They're 66 feet tall and 5 feet wide, each pillar. 300 of them. Each one weighs about 150 tons. That's 45 million tons of pillars. And 500 years ago, how do you haul them? They're limestone. How do you bring them there to a place like that?
Perfectly shaped.
Yeah, and perfectly shaped. We can assume there was a lot of slave labor. So, and I didn't want to talk about that, but I think you guys figured it out, right? But the thing is that the whole point is that the end of slavery taking place, not that declaration to end slavery taking place in such a location actually is also very symbolic. So Amma came on that same day that I got there, and everything was wonderful. We were all joyous. It was hard for me to enjoy the excitement because I had to give a talk the next morning, which I was told only like 24 hours in advance. So I was up very late preparing my talk. And we went, most of us, about 30, 40 people, went for an all-day function the first day. A few lucky people didn't have to go for the function. Got to be with Amma instead. Like Rohan can tell about getting to be with Amma. She went out on the veranda of this hotel, which is right on St. Peter's Square, which means there's a beautiful garden on the rooftop. And then you saw the photo on Facebook or something, right? Amma sitting there, her sari flowing, and then you can see the basilica in the background. Devidas was there too. Meanwhile, we were sitting in a meeting the whole time.
We missed Swami Satsang.
No, you didn't miss anything.
Sold by Amma Satsang.
Yeah. I would have traded places anytime, right? So, but the interesting thing was this place that the function was held was the same place that Amma's function was going to be held the next day. It's called the Casina. And it was also built in 1561 as the summer residence of the Pope. And it's surrounded by the Vatican Gardens. Very beautiful spot. So, unfortunately we missed Amma on the veranda, but it was okay. And we were, trying to do something to interact with the other attendees, like Buddhist and Christian attendees who were there. And that night, the bishop, who is the chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, which is actually what that casina is, that whole structure, that whole facility is an Academy of Sciences. The chancellor is a bishop. He's the bishop that came to see Amma in LA, right?
Same one. And sciences and social sciences.
And social sciences, yeah. So he has a really important role, and he's completely enamored of Amma. He came the night before and he sat down and he said, Amma, it's kind of ironic that on an occasion like this, because there was a whole bunch of different religious leaders coming the next day. And he says that, on an occasion like this, it's kind of ironic how people are so concerned about where they're going to sit and what the order of speaking is going to be and who's going to sign first and who's going to, like that. He says, you're the only one who's not affected by that. That's how he said, that's how we can see who a real spiritual person is. Because Amma, you're not affected by any of that stuff. It's really...
Amma never asked.
The
Pope elected to have Amma sit.
Yeah, other people were fighting over it.
Signed right after him.
Other people were fighting over the seating and the order of the signing, and the Pope himself said, Amma should sit right next to me and she should sign right after me. And the Indian people who were there were thinking, it's the first Indian to be called to the Vatican, non-Catholic. I don't know if a Catholic Indian has been called to the Vatican, but But even if you're like a great Catholic priest in India, you don't just get to go to the Vatican and sit next to the Pope. You know, it's like here, Amma's not Catholic. She's nothing as far as the Vatican is concerned. But the Pope is inviting her to come, and he wants her to sit right next to him.
And also, one more thing, nobody was smiling except Amma.
Yeah, she was also she was also the only person who gave her talk without looking at papers.
And the longest speech, totally memorized.
The longest speech, but the only one where nobody was sleeping, I think, also, yeah.
But Amma's speeches, all the satsangs are always, she looks at them and they're all committed to them.
What was it that you said?
Did Big Swami translate for her?
No, one of the brahmacharis was in a lower level in a simultaneous translation room. We were ready for that. They had some technical glitches. We won't get into that. It's kind of boring. But anyhow, so also a couple of a couple of scientists came that first night to meet Amma. Also, they came to her hotel to meet her. And one of the scientists, they're both Indian, but one of them is actually a very eminent scientist in the field of global warming and climatological issues. And he is a high advisor to the Vatican in that field, and they're scheduling a conference on climate change. And he's really trying to get Amma to come to that in the spring, but I don't know, Amma's so busy, I don't know whether she can even go, but it shows, even before she gave her talk, they were already trying to line her up for the next thing. So we went early the following morning.
Where is it going to be?
Chicago, yeah. We went early in the morning. Security was very tight. And we were waiting again, it was in the casino, right? It's very full of history, this building. It was a very beautiful setting. And Amma came with the Pope and the other religious leaders. I think it was nice. The Pope came last, I think. He let all the guests come first, and then he came out last. That was a nice gesture. And actually, you know, I didn't really know who was coming until we got there. And there's so many really eminent religious leaders. I mean, I would never say that any of them could hold a candle to Amma. I mean, even the Pope, we don't think of him when, if you had a choice to be with the Pope or be with Amma, everybody's going to go to be with Amma. But still, the backgrounds of the people is interesting. So I printed out all of their bios. I just took it from internet. Most of them have Wikipedia articles on them, and some of the people that were there are just like revered by millions of people in their faith. Like the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar. I'm sure you all are very, familiar with him, right? He is considered to be the highest authority in Sunni Islam. That's not a small thing. How many Sunni, Muslims are there in the world?
Was he on the left of Amma?
If you're looking at Amma, he was on the far left. Well, he was 2 to the left of the Pope. Yeah, he spoke best of any of the Islamic, people that was there. He was the only one that really said something that kind of touched your heart. Anyhow, so I printed that out, and I also printed out the other 2 articles that were on the internet. And anybody who wants to see it afterwards, you can do that. No, one of everything, that's all. So I won't read Amma's speech to you. It's too long, but it's there. You can also see it on internet. And anyhow, it was phenomenal. It was phenomenal in the sense that it was one of the only speeches, I can't think of any other speech that had theory and then examples from experience as well as practical advice on how to implement it. Exactly. And some people didn't even talk about the topic at all, but that's another issue. But I mean,
mentioned that disparagingly to us because we're so attuned to Amma. But to the press, it was obvious. So many of them came, they just flocked to Amma after the event.
That was the thing. After the event, everybody walked out. Nobody really, chased after them, but everybody flocked to Amma. The special guest flocked to Amma. There was an Indian actress there. She went to Amma. There was one girl who has been a victim of trafficking, but she was also an advocate for, and she went to meet Amma. This is a very well-known economist named Jeffrey Sachs. Anybody heard of him? He came, he and his wife went to see Amma.
And said they were coming to India.
Yeah, yeah. And his wife is interested in the children's home in Kenya. And the Templeton family guy came to see Amma. And it was like everybody was in line.
The journalist.
It's a very famous prize, Templeton Prize. So, and he came to see Amma. They were all like lined up waiting to see Amma. Yes?
Was there, did Amma have a chance to hug the Pope?
They had an interaction. Yeah. I mean, Amma's not going to chase after, like, run and tackle him or anything like that, you know. And so, unless he walks up and you know, and he stands in front of her, you know, but there was an interaction. It was behind closed doors. We don't know what happened. But, yeah. Mm-hmm. It's not important. She wasn't going because the Pope invited her to come hug him, right? She went for a specific purpose. But, you know, it came up.
But I'll tell you, she took the Pope's hand,
Mm-hmm.
and she, like, in reverence, bowed, and I believe kissed his hand. We see that. And we all took that to understand Amma was giving her blessing to the Pope. I'm sure he took it as she was taking his blessing. I don't know. But Amma, in all humility, made that act.
See, that's the difference. Well, there's a difference in India. I like the Indian way of you know, kissing the hand, basically, because in the West, you know, we really kiss it actually, but in India they take it and they go like that, you know. So, you know, you're taking that person's prarabdha, they're taking their karma. You're effectively, I mean, if you're a Mahatma, you're giving them a blessing by removing their karma. So, right. I mean, he's not the Pope because he's God realized. He got elected. That's all it is.
In all fairness, we all really respect this Pope. He has been courageous. He is doing incredibly.
No, not to disparage anything, but I mean, we just have to be mindful that, you know, the popes are elected, and they're, you know, so he has karma too. So maybe she's. I have to be careful. This is being recorded, right? Okay. So, scratch that from the record, please. All right.
Which is what we felt in the hotel.
Okay, so now with all the time that I don't have, I did promise that I would share this declaration with people, because that was one of the concerns, is that in the India's tradition, it's not organized like the Catholic Church. So, you know, not that kind of organization. So there was some concern raised about how are we going to disseminate the meaning of this declaration that was made, right? To end slavery, modern day slavery. So I promised that I would share it with all the people that I come in contact with. So I'm going to, it's very short. It's a couple of paragraphs. So I'm going to read it out to you. This is what Amma went all the way there to sign, right? So we, the undersigned, are gathered here today for a historic initiative to inspire spiritual and practical action by all global faiths and people of goodwill everywhere to eradicate modern slavery across the world by 2020 and for all time. In the eyes of God, each human being is a free person, whether girl, boy, woman, or man, and is destined to exist for the good of all in eternity, and is destined to exist for the good of all in equality and fraternity. Modern slavery, in terms of human trafficking, forced labor and prostitution, organ trafficking, and any relationship that fails to respect the fundamental conviction that all people are equal and have the same freedom and dignity, is a crime against humanity. We pledge ourselves here today to do all in our power, within our faith communities and beyond, to work together for the freedom of all those who are enslaved and trafficked, so that their future may be restored. Today we have the opportunity, awareness, wisdom, innovation, and technology to achieve this human and moral imperative. So that's what I'm signed.
Swamiji, the AP had a good article on the bit of compromise and conflict over the.
Yeah, we won't go into that. We won't go into that. There's no time. We won't go into that. No, we can talk about that on another occasion. Yeah. Okay, so first we'll chant the closing mantras. I think actually, because we're already so late, we'll just have a very short meditation, then we'll chant all three closing mantras. I want us to, today is also a very special day because it's Kartika, Amma's birthday. So I want us to remember Amma, as well as all the less fortunate people in the world today. Let's just make this a brief meditation, praying for all the victims of human trafficking, of which there are 35 million in the world today. Imagine 3 times the population of Illinois. Pray for all these people. At first, they may have peace of mind, and ultimately freedom. Let us also pray for the hundreds of thousands of Filipinos who are fleeing at this moment due to the approach of a very dangerous typhoon set to make landfall in the exact same area as last year, late tonight. With each breath, try to send them vibrations of peace and compassion. Now let us chant in conclusion. Take a deep breath. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnāād Purnamudacchate Purnasya Purnamādāya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Namaskar and see you next week.